All right, let's wait another 1 or 2 more minutes and see if more people are joining, and then I'll start discussing. So today we are going to do therapeutic guidelines, page number 260 till page number 269. So I think this is our public session, so there will be a lot of students who are not in the course but joining this particular TG class. So just wanted to address so that everybody is aligned and on the same page that these are our regular ongoing daily life classes where we are discussing TG4 page-wise, 10 pages at a time, and we are almost in the last leg of TG. So we are 2 weeks shy of finishing. This week we'll finish till page number 300, and then next week we'll be entirely finishing it. So anyone who's looking for, I mean, I know the March 26 enrollments we have currently stopped, but there are still some people who are joining us for last 3 weeks also, in fact, for the TG classes. So if anyone there who wants to get into the crash course, because this time our crash course is also getting TG classes, so you can message me on my WhatsApp and get information. But most importantly, this is the version that the September 26 batch will be preparing from and is already preparing. The rest of the TG is not Shelly. So this is only this class, and previously I did one more class, and next week also I'll do one more public TG class. But all of the, so we have total 36 TG classes, 35 TG classes. So only once a week I'm doing these this week, and next week would be public. And but if you want the access to everything, and if you're going for March, so you can get into the crash course, we have reasonably deducted the amount and reduced the price for making it like only for 3 weeks. And September 26 candidates who are planning to take the exam in September, we have full swing begin the September preparation. September candidates are already preparing this updated TG4 classes, doing all the ultimate advanced file classes, UF2 classes, MMF classes, which are our like big question bank of the past year questions. They're already doing with the updated latest TG4 changes. So as always, Winspert is ahead of the curve and doing the having and bringing the most updated material. So we in the last 15 days updated our entire database of more than 10,000 questions, mocks, 170 mocks, almost everything got updated, revived. Like we were working 24 hours, and we reviewed and revived every entire database actually with all the latest TG4 recommendations and guidelines and concept. And if you enroll today for September 24, you get almost 2.5 months of extra access, which will give you such a great head start. You're not paying anything for those 2.5 months extra, and you get the entire 5 month course, but you get for 7.5 months access and no extra fees. So this is the best deal. Please grab, and because you can start with TG classes, you can start with the updated material, and you get the more time for revisions and repetitions of the syllabus, which usually gets harder for people to revise because 5 months is harder to review the resources multiple times. But if you join today for September, that gives you quite an advantage and a head start. So if you're looking for September course, this is your time to begin. This is actually grab this opportunity. This offer is going on for a very limited time that we are giving this 2.5 months free access. So you can contact my team or my WhatsApp number. My team has shared it on the chat and get the details. All right, without much ado, I'll not keep you all waiting because I know everybody is excited to learn about the dental management of medically challenged patients. And today we're going to be talking about hypertension and other cardiac conditions. And along with that, I will be also discussing your peri-procedural bleeding condition. So remember, Priyanka, yeah, yesterday you told me you were having difficulty understanding that bleeding risk component of that table. I think the glucocorticoid adrenal crisis part of the table was clear to you. So was the prophylaxis table also. I think the problem was the bleeding part. And I understand a lot of students would have confusion with that if you were only looking at that table because you've not done the chapter entirely. And that is a big chapter, big topic, and there are multiple conditions which implicate the bleeding risk. starting from hypertension, then some devices also, and then some drugs, some acquired conditions, some genetic conditions. So, of course, one table cannot help you understand a concept which is so deep. So, today we'll dive into it and we'll learn more. So, I was thinking about you when I was preparing the class that Priyanka should feel better when she watches it, and she should say that yes, yesterday was just the surface level which we scratched, and today are we going deeper. And in the next class, we will go further deeper. And I promise you, once you complete all these classes in series, you will feel confident in the entire concept. So I was just thinking about you that yes, no student should, have that confusion. It's my job, Priyanka. It's my responsibility to always look after you all. Even a single person's concern triggers something in me, and then I have to make sure that how can I resolve that problem, and then that sometime actually brings out the best solutions, right? So yes, let's start. We'll start from page number 260, and we'll do from till page number 269. So we'll first talk about hypertension, management of patients who have hypertension in your dental clinic. What are the considerations? So patients who are treated for hypertension, who are getting treatment and have their blood pressure under control, they can undergo most of the general dental treatment. There is no problem at all. Controlled hypertension is not a contraindication for general dental treatment, whether elective or emergency, right? Now, there are certain conditions which can actually exacerbate even a controlled hypertension, which is, so even a patient has controlled hypertension, if there is dental anxiety in the patient, that can exacerbate it. So advices are given. So it's a guideline for you to consider hypertension as a risk factor when you're also evaluating periprocedural bleeding risk, because first it also elevates the bleeding risk, and also control dental anxiety because it can exacerbate hypertension, even the controlled one, and that can implicate the bleeding risk after the procedure. Understood? So if your patient has anxiety and comes with hypertension, even if it's controlled, you will control the anxiety. It will make sure your hypertension remains under control during the procedure, and that also maintains that periprocedural bleeding risk is also reduced. Now, when you're treating such patients with hypertension, they might be having dental pain, any acute dental pain, post-procedural pain. So you should consider taking their complete drug history. If they are taking diuretics or any ACE inhibitors or angiotensin 2 receptor blocker, then in those situations, NSAIDs are avoided. They are contraindicated, should not be given because they increase the risk of renal toxicity. In combination with these drugs of antihypertensives, the renal toxicity risk increases. So it should be considered carefully. If, unless really importantly required, you should talk to the medical practitioner for advice. Otherwise, just give paracetamol in mild to moderate pain. Do not give NSAID. So hypertensive drugs along with NSAID is an increased renal toxicity possibility. Now, another implication, and the question in exam can be the implications of using adrenaline in hypertensive patients. So now the thing is that although adrenaline has limited effect on elevation of blood pressure, so in controlled hypertensive patients, there is no recommendation to avoid it, right? But completely avoid using adrenaline in uncontrolled hypertensive patients. And when you replace or use, what substitute would you use when you are not using adrenaline for uncontrolled hypertensive patients? You will use any agent which includes flurpiridaz. So prilocaine with flurpiridaz will become your agent of choice. I want to also show you the reference. So again, I've opened the ETG here because of switching pages gets difficult. I opened the references for you prior. So, if adrenaline cannot be used, so adrenaline containing solutions in patients who have myocardial infarction in the previous 6 months, unstable angina, uncontrolled hypertension, uncontrolled arrhythmias, or uncontrolled hyperthyroidism. These are contraindications to adrenaline. If adrenaline cannot be used, then LA, which contains philipressin, which is prilocaine with philipressin most commonly, you can use that as an alternative. Now, philipressin is also a vasoconstrictor, but its effect on myocardium or on heart muscles is limited at the concentration which is used in the dental cartridges, which is 0.03 international units per ml. So it is also safe for use during pregnancy. So references seen, dots connected, concept clear. Another concept I want to show you to connect your dots is in the examination, you will be given various blood pressure values. How to know which is controlled, which is not controlled. So this is your cardiovascular therapeutic guidelines. Again, it's not on oral and dental, but I use ETG guideline references from other disciplines of medicine. And so it's cardiovascular guidelines. You do not have to get access to it or refer to it. My classes will show you enough references which are needed for your examination. So this is important because we do not have to follow any Canadian, American, or European guidelines for defining, because country wise, diabetes and hypertension guidelines, they change, they vary, right? Every country and continent wise, the hypertension ranges, they change the defining factors, what values would define. Some countries are more aggressive, like in US you would find at even a lower level they start giving like hypoglycemics and antihypertensives. That is why it's best to follow for hypertension what really defines it, right? What are your targets after giving medication? So these are your blood pressure treatment targets, and when to start the medication, that also you must know, because as a dentist, when you come and when you take vitals, you should also know if a patient doesn't even know that he has elevated blood pressure, you could be accidentally diagnosing it in your chair also. Does that make sense? Is it right or wrong that when the patient comes to you and he doesn't know he has elevated blood pressure and you're taking vitals, and sometimes you might be the first one to identify it, so you must also know what is that value which requires medical referral at starting of the antihypertensive drugs. So here is the reference for patients with consistently significantly elevated blood pressure, which is 160 by 100. Start the drug therapy irrespective of the patient's atherosclerosis, cardiovascular disease risk, right? So 160 by 100 consistently, significantly is an indication. So if any time in your chair you find a patient who has this value and he doesn't know how long he has had it, please make a referral to the medical practitioner. This is uncontrolled hypertension. Whether diagnosed or not, or consistent or not, medical practitioner will look at it. This will be a contraindicated to any elective procedure on your chair. Please give me yes or no's instead of cross questioning. Try to receive what I'm giving you. These are actual exam concepts that I'm giving you right now. Okay. So instead of forming your own questions and missing out on learning this, use this opportunity to make notes simultaneously. So anytime in your examination, this history is given to you. These values are given to you, whether diagnosed or non-diagnosed. You will not do any elective dental procedure at that moment. Only manage emergency minimally. Send the patient immediately for medical assessment. Understood? These are your numbers. Take note. This is important exam concept and question. Now, what are the targets? When do you know that your patient is having uncontrolled diabetes and he's on antihypertensives also? So the target is, when they give antihypertensive, the target is to keep the blood pressure below 140 by 90. So if your patient has this or below and he's taking drugs, it is your controlled diabetes or controlled hypertension. Is that clear? So write down please, 160 by 100, that was your uncontrolled. 140 by 90 or below is your controlled. Okay. So 160 by 100 is when you start the drug. So anything above 140 by 90 should be your indicator to send the patient for referral, basically, because this is what a controlled hypertension would look like. Simple. Anything above this, refer to the medical practitioner. All right. Can do minimally invasive procedure in that appointment up to 150, but anything above that, refer immediately, not even any elective procedure. All right, so this is that reference. Now coming back, LA understood, LA guideline understood, you'll replace it with phelipressin containing in case there is an contraindication. Now, calcium channel blockers, which are used to treat hypertension, they also have oral manifestation, which is they cause gingival enlargement. So that is also an oral manifestation. As a dentist, you must be aware of that. You will promote good oral hygiene and periodontal debridement for patients who are taking calcium channel blockers and have drug-related gingival enlargement, right? And it would require specialist periodontal and medical management. Now, another heart condition or another medical condition that would require dental considerations is angina and MI, myocardial infarct, right? Or a heart attack. So, for your myocardial infarct episode, up till 12 months, there is a risk of a major next adverse cardiac event. Whether it's a myocardial infarction or a stent procedure or a coronary artery bypass surgery or valve procedures, prosthetic cardiac valve replacement, any of these surgical procedures or a history of myocardial infarct, any of these after that episode till 12 months, there is an increased risk of a major adverse cardiac event, and that can lead to sudden death. So for 6 months, you would defer any elective dental procedure after these procedures. So the risk is higher up to 12 months, but the deferring of the treatment is not required up to 12 months. Okay? Can you please take note of that? Important. You will only defer the treatment for 6 months. The risk remains higher for 12 months. If dental pain or infection occurs within the 6 months, then you will only give emergency treatment, but you will not use adrenaline containing LA. I showed you on the reference here also. Any infarct in within 6 months or any procedure within 6 months, if there is an emergency, adrenaline is avoided. Okay? Important concept, learn it. Now, would defer elective dental treatments for 6 months after these episodes, MI or stent or bypass surgery or heart valve procedures? Now, patients who have angina, if it is stable, there is no contraindication to dental procedures. Stable angina or myocardial infarct after 6 months, no contraindication to elective or emergency dental treatments. But unstable angina is a contraindication to an elective dental treatment. Adrenaline also, only emergency can be managed. And refer the patient for stabilizing the angina. Okay? Pre-existing coronary stent is not an indication for surgical ABP. So, and your infective endocarditis. Also, your stents are not a risk, but your prosthetic heart valves are. Okay. Now, there are certain conditions, cardiac conditions, for which the patient is taking antithrombotic drugs, atrial fibrillations, prosthetic valves also. A lot of cardiac procedures, even after myocardial infarction, patients are on antithrombotic drugs, sometimes for short duration, sometimes for longer duration, and a long-term therapy. Complete assessment of those patients has to be done, which we will do in the chapter tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll be talking about entirely about antithrombotics. Okay? So we learn about the patient assessment tomorrow. Today also I'll brief you with one flowchart, but tomorrow in depth we're reading the antithrombotic chapter. So what are the procedures which are likely to cause, whether it's a single antithrombotic, it's an antiplatelet, it's anticoagulant, it's a combination of the drugs, long term, short term. We learn all the factors in the next class. Okay? So, but you have to assess these patients for hemostasis because these cardiac conditions have patients on antithrombotic drugs. For angina patients, your advice should be for letting them to bring their medication, GTN spray. Although it's an emergency medication, you must also have it in your clinic because it's a emergency medication for management of angina episode during the clinic. And you have it readily accessible. You will keep the duration of the dental procedures shorter, use relaxation techniques, and manage anxiety. And good analgesic control is important for angina. Adrenaline is not contraindicated with patients of stable angina. Is that clear? So in stable angina, adrenaline is not contraindicated. There is no contraindication. In fact, good analgesic control will reduce the dental anxiety in the patients. Is that correct? Does everyone get it? So far, so good. Hypertension and your cardiac conditions. No, Anushe, analgesics where here when we say analgesic control analgesia is through local anesthesia, right? Anesthetize it because while doing a procedure, pain should not happen. That can trigger anxiety and angina attack. Okay, Anushe? So here it's not about acute dental pain management with analgesics. Here when they use the term analgesia, it is for ensure effective analgesia during the procedure using local anesthesia. So subsiding the pain using anesthetic. Is that sorted? The confusion. Heart failure and its dental indications. So the congestive heart failure patients might also come to your clinic. You will not do any dental treatment in these patients unless their medical practitioner advises that it's a stable CHF. Only a stable heart failure condition because congestive heart failure has only percentage of failure. There is still some functioning. It has to be stabilized with using drugs, diuretics, etc. But the doctor has to give the clearance that it's a stable CHF. You will limit the duration of dental procedures in these patients also. They do not tolerate being in horizontal position. It increases the cardiac input, increases the load on the heart. So you'll position on a chair slightly higher where the heart is slightly higher, head is higher than the heart, right? And on a position which patient also comfortably can sleep at home. So position and stability of your heart failure are two important considerations. Now, patients who have severe heart failure, they cannot withstand sedation or GA. So procedures which require sedation or GA should be absolutely done in hospital with an anesthetist present under the multiple specialist team. You will avoid NSAIDs in CHF patients. Why? Because CHF also has renal implications, diuretics are going on. So all sedations, all forms of sedation are likely to have adverse effects. You will not use them. Okay, minimal also. So patients who have severe heart failure should not be prescribed NSAIDs, and patients of CHF who are taking diuretics or they have antihypertensives, ACE inhibitors, angiotensin 2 receptor blocker, because there's again risk of acute kidney injury, they should not be prescribed NSAIDs. Now, some patients of heart failure may be future candidates for heart transplant. So you should also continue to give them regular dental assessment if they are getting waitlisted for their transplant procedure. Another important cardiac condition, medical condition, which can require dental considerations is cardiac implanted electronic devices. They include your cardioverter defibrillators, permanent pacemakers, ventricular assistive devices. Mostly, they are not a contraindication to general dental treatment. Surgical diathermy can interfere with some of these electronic devices. So that's important. Surgical diathermy can interfere with some of these devices. Now, with modern devices, interference from most electronic and ultrasonic dental devices is usually not significant. However, if you are not sure what generation of device is that, what are the indications with the dental devices, in that case, whenever in doubt, consult the cardiologist responsible for the management of these electronic devices and expert seek their advice before you start dental procedure with those dental devices which are electronic and can interfere. Now, do not confuse electronic devices with cardiac walls, prosthetic cardiac walls, because your electronic implanted devices do not require your infective endocarditis prophylaxis, whereas your prosthetic cardiac walls, they do. Patients with left ventricular assistive devices, LVADs, specifically this one, LVAD, they are at risk of thrombotic events. That means clot formation can happen around these devices. And that is why they are put on long-term antithrombotics. So any examination history, you see the word left ventricular assisting device, consider your use of ultrasonics and your electronic devices. That is one thing. Talk to the cardiologist for that. And also know LVADs have antithrombotics going on because of the thrombotic events. Patients with LVADs can be at an increased risk of post-op bleeding because of their antithrombotics plus a combined effect of LVAD-induced blood pressure changes. Now, this is where ADC gets you. If you know this concept partially, exam will give you options like why does LVAD increase the risk of post-op bleeding? Option will be antithrombotics. LVAD changes blood pressure. They are on antihypertensives, or antithrombotics and LVAD change blood pressures combined effect. All four options are given. Now, if your concept is partial and you do not realize and remember that LVAD has double effect on bleeding, antithrombotics plus its own blood pressure changes, then only you can choose correct options in exam. And this is how ADC frames questions. When you're reading TG, try to find concepts in such light that where there is combined effect, where there is an extra point contributing to something. ADC loves talking about linked and connected points which contribute to the medical problem, which contribute to the dental problem. Okay? So ADC loves sequencing, ADC loves combining effects, knowing multifactorial factor. So multifactorial questions are favorite. LVAD, we did not give AVP, infective endocarditis. No, it is a recent addition, yes, with the TG4 updation, right, Satvika? Along with prosthetic cardiac valve, only one device which has gotten the infective endocarditis as an extra ABP, which was not in the previous table, is LVAD device, right? So it also calls for infective endocarditis prophylaxis. Now, assessing peri-procedural bleeding risk in dental practice. Now, this is also the surface level that we are going to talk today. In detail, we will be discussing about antithrombotics in the next class. Today, we will learn about the procedures which are likely to cause, not likely to cause, and highly likely to cause bleeding. Three different factors, and we'll learn the table for all these three categories. What should be your management plan? Then we'll do a flowchart around it to memorize it. And then we will learn about the congenital bleeding risk disease and acquired diseases. The other conditions of bleeding risk are antithrombotics. So antithrombotics we'll do tomorrow, congenital we'll do today, and your acquired we'll do today. And the risk assessment chart we'll do today. Okay? Everybody's got the idea what we are going forward doing in the next 5 pages? So we are doing assessment of all the procedures, the general management. This is again generic and general. Then we'll summarize it as a flow chart. We'll learn about acquired bleeding conditions and congenital bleeding conditions. Thrombotic one we'll give tomorrow. Yes, the X equation we'll do tomorrow, Cappy. Okay. The X formula, the X by 2, 2X formula we'll do tomorrow. Okay. That is an antithrombotic chapter. And I'll have to see because that was applicable as per the previous guidelines. We'll have to see if the guidelines have changed. Does it apply or not? If I need a new formula when I prepare for the class tomorrow, next class, then we'll do it. Okay. So for your all the patients, always acquire full medical and drug history because before doing any dental procedure, you must have a peri-procedural bleeding risk assessed for all your patients. So getting full medical history and full dental history is important to plan the appropriate treatment setting and what would be the hemostatic measures that would be required. So the practitioner's ability, first of all, your ability to achieve hemostasis. If your skills are lacking and there is a high risk, you would refer to the hospital or specialist team or specialist clinic. Then what is the likelihood of the procedure causing prolonged bleeding? So we'll discuss that, what treatments cause higher risk, what treatments cause likely risk, what treatments have no risk. And what is the clinical consequence of bleeding? If it happens, what should be done? So if what is the bleeding management, we have done it. If you remember, we made a small poster also on our Facebook. Did anyone see? I shared it on also on the Facebook. A little small memory tool for you to remember all the management of bleeding. So that we made because it's an extremely important exam concept. We are trying to create those visual tools. So what you can do is actually on this Facebook Live, you can put comments later if you want on any TG topic those memory tools made, and I'll be happy to make more of them. Okay. So memorize the management of bleeding during the procedure and after the procedure. Those are extremely stepwise. I've taught you in the previous TG class also. Revise that, memorize that table, and use those pictographic posters for your quick memory tool. Then, how will you assess the dental procedure risk around the So what is the risk of bleeding around the procedure, whether it's from coming from the procedure or the patient's condition? It is a combined assessment. First, the procedure should also have a risk, and then the patient's condition should also pose that. So most dental procedures pose a relatively minor risk of bleeding. The goal is you should know what investigations to do, what blood tests, what INRs, where to do INRs, what blood tests to be done, how to assess the investigation and the patient's bleeding risk. Then what are the hemostasis measures which would be required additionally for like increased risk of bleeding? And what is the most appropriate setting for the treatment? Your practice, your skills, or hospital is required. So all that assessment you would do. Although most dental procedures can be undertaken in general dental practice with careful planning, referral to a dental specialist should be considered for patients with impaired hemostasis, particularly if a high risk procedure is planned or if a clinician does not feel comfortable giving a hemostatic measures required. So if you are not comfortable with your skills, no matter whatever the risk, low or high, if it's a higher risk procedure especially, you would refer to the specialist. Even in the remote and rural locations, so you should see after our services are available and capable of managing the bleeding complications. When the risk is higher, only then plan it. If there are no available facilities, then don't do it. Defer the treatment and only do it with hospital setting or in a city setup where the specialist clinic is available for the aftercare also. For all the patients, do careful assessment of their peri-procedural bleeding risk and plan the treatment accordingly. This peri-procedural assessment, if you can master this table and concept, any history given to you in exam, no matter whatever the nature of the procedure, whatever their medical history, whatever their antithrombotic history, once you learn these 2-3 pages so well, I would highly recommend to watch this class again, review these tables again, take notes while you do it, but this becomes the heart and soul of answering all these questions. Okay? So, if possible, all the risk factors should be assessed before procedures, not after. And if the patient's bleeding risk is dynamic, maybe they have unstable INRs, or they are thrombocytopenic and their platelet count fluctuates, in dynamic bleeding risk, reassess the patient before each procedure which is likely to cause bleeding. Okay. So if you remember, infective endocarditis rule was two things. The procedure should be likely to create the bacteremia and the cardiac condition should match. Agreed? Remember two checkbox I told you for infective endocarditis. Procedure is likely to create that infection risk and the cardiac condition should be present. If one of those is not present, you will not indicate infective endocarditis. So remember the similar checklist for your peri-procedural bleeding risk. This will come handy in exam. Your shortcut, which is the procedure likely to cause bleeding? Right? Number one, is the patient's condition is first likely to cause bleeding or the procedure is likely to cause bleeding? Both these factors check, then there is a higher risk. Agreed? So what are the procedures which are unlikely to cause prolonged bleeding? Now this gets a little gray here. This is not as straightforward as an infective endocarditis because here there is likely to cause bleeding are lower risk and higher risk. So lower risk requires certain extra assessments. Okay. Give me yes or no if you understand that it is not as black and white as infective endocarditis because there you would check only condition and treatment straightforward. Here this becomes slightly more gray and more gradient. Why? Because there the procedures which are likely to cause also are under two categories. One which are higher risk. For that you will memorize straightforward. You will talk to the medical practitioner, they will give you the plan. Very simple. Whenever your conclusion comes out higher risk, the medical team will help you. But when there is a lower risk, right, then you have to do further risk assessment that it requires medical team assessment, complete medical referral, or you have certain guidelines. I'll slowly take you step by step there. Do not get overwhelmed right now. I'll take you there. We'll break it down step by step. I'm just giving you, it is not very straightforward also. You will take multiple repeat watching and reading to get there. Okay. First, can you memorize these four categories? Non-invasive, minimally invasive. Then comes your likely to cause bleeding, which has low risk invasive and high risk invasive. Then we shall take one step at a time. So let's talk about unlikely to cause bleeding, non-invasive, and then unlikely to cause bleeding, minimally invasive. Even in non-invasive procedures and minimally invasive procedures, which are unlikely to cause prolonged bleeding, congenital conditions of hemophilia and von Willebrand, they still are a very high risk conditions because even paper cuts can be dangerous in them. Just for example. Understood? So for bleeding risk, even in the minimally invasive and non-invasive, unlikely to cause prolonged bleeding, congenital conditions still have assessment and limiting factors. Can you memorize first point? As I go along, I'll give you this is the foundation to get the hold of the concept. So this is your first foundation rule. You can write down the foundation rules, okay? Can you do that? Because next time when you watch the class or next time when you read the file, my foundation rules will help you summarize quickly. Shall we do that? Yes. And I will not repeat further. I'm only repeating it once. Bring all your ears on the table. Okay? I will give you foundation rules of the tables. You be on a high alert mode. It's an intense class. I still have 6 more pages to do. Right? So the number one foundation rule is, even in unlikely to cause prolonged bleeding procedures, which is your non-invasive and minimally invasive procedures, there are certain procedures, even in non-invasive and minimally invasive category, which are likely to cause risk in congenital and inherited bleeding disorders, which are what? Those medical conditions are hemophilia, von Willebrand disease, and other genetic conditions, congenital conditions. I'll give you the list. Okay. So in non-invasive, usually nothing. Most procedures can be managed by general dentist, right? Even patients who are taking antithrombotics, even patient with acquired diseases, acquired bleeding disorders. Only congenital and inherited bleeding disorder patients, this particular procedure, which is periodontal probing in a gingivitis, you should consider limiting the probing, because gingivitis and probing can prolong the bleeding in these von Willebrand hemophilic patients. First foundation rule, please, this is the red underline, write down. Non-invasive procedure, careful in your periodontal probing in gingivitis, in congenital and inherited bleeding disorder. That is your first rule. Second table. Minimally invasive procedures, which are not requiring LA, right? Or, sorry, which are restorations requiring LA or closed root canal therapy. So, non-invasive were all your sulcular procedures. We talked about sulcular procedures yesterday also, right? In that combined table of ABP and adrenal crisis and bleeding. So non-invasive are your x-rays, impressions, examination, and your supragingival investigations and restorations, which are not requiring LA, and your fluoride treatment, placing and tightening of orthodontic brands. These are your completely non-invasive. Now, minimally invasive are either LA containing, RCT, or your sulcular procedures. So LA and sulcular. These are your minimally invasive procedures, LA and sulcular. Write down foundation 2. Minimally invasive procedures are LA and sulcular procedures. Now for these patients, implications are usually there is no higher risk. Just your guideline is to minimize the gingival trauma as much as possible. But if you're doing only one of these procedures, which is supragingival debridement, number one, you know, supragingival debridement in cardiac conditions is an indicator for infective endocarditis ABP. Remember? Yes or no? From yesterday also, from previous chapters also. These are core concepts. You should know them. Okay? Perfect. So most of these LA and sulcular procedures can be managed. Minimize gingival trauma. That's your guideline. Now, for your supragingival debridement, gingivitis is likely because your plaque and calculus is there. Supragingivally, gingivitis is there. So, bleeding risk is likely, right? So, when you should then assess for medical conditions and medications which affect bleeding risk. We will do that. And your antithrombotics come under that, right? Cardiac conditions come under that. All those increase, right? The risk. And if gingivitis is present, consider whether the extent influences bleeding risk. So we'll talk about these in next class, more detail. Now for the von Willebrand hemophilic congenital bleeding, talk to the hematologist or hemophilia center before debridement. As before, periodontal probing was also not advised. So again, supragingival debridement also in the congenital diseases, not advised. Refer to their specialist centers. Probably they would do it in their centers. Now, patients with thrombocytopenia, there are different stages of thrombocytopenia and level of platelet count. Again, you will involve the medical practitioner and formulate the management plan. Okay. Why probing you can do above we discussed. No probing, Anushay, for congenital you should avoid in gingivitis. That we have already done in the above table. It will not be written again here, no? Probing factor we already discussed in the non-invasive procedure. So now patients with thrombocytopenia also will require medical practitioner. Congenital will require hematologist involvement, and medical conditions will require further assessment. We will talk about that. Now those were your non-invasive and minimally invasive. Clear for everyone? There were two big headings, not likely to and likely to. Not likely to was non-invasive and minimally invasive. Now, in likely to is lower risk and higher risk. Now, in likely to, lower risk. They're likely to cause, but the risk is lower. So those kind of procedures are subgingival debridement, IND of swellings, and small soft tissue biopsies. So not mucogingival flap surgeries or extractions. You can remember like that. Here there is no non-surgical, no flap is being raised. Can you remember it like that? These are kind of minor surgical manipulations like IND and soft tissue biopsies and non-surgical subgingival debridement. So they manipulate the soft tissue, but they are not flap procedures. So they are low risk, likely to cause prolonged bleeding. Implications for management of bleeding risk is most procedures can be managed by general dentist, but specialist advice may be required. For the medical conditions and medications, you will have bleeding risk. We will manage the patients when we'll go in the further table in the next chapter, right, of the antithrombotics and the medical conditions. In the congenital patients, you will contact the hemophilic team. For thrombocytopenia or any other acquired conditions, again team. And patients who are taking more than one antithrombotic drugs, advise on consultation and referral. So 2x, remember from the TG3 classes, the 2x condition, one or more antithrombotic, even the low risk procedure becomes a referral to the consultation thing, right? So again, I'm saying this topic is always in layers. You cannot memorize in one thing. It's a layered topic. It's an intense topic. Once I give you the X formula in the next class, and then you club back, it'll all start making sense. So this table is more important for congenital, thrombocytopenic, knowing the low risk, high risk, minimally invasive and non-invasive. Okay. Now, procedures which are likely to cause prolonged bleeding are higher risk procedures. High risk procedures are where the flap will be manipulated, dental extractions, regardless of the number of teeth. But it can also vary depending upon what is the complexity of the extraction, what is the location of the tooth, what is the remaining periodontal attachment. Because even not all extractions are equally bleeding risk, right? But they are all high risk invasive procedure, all kinds of extractions. Further risk assessment is done based on the number of teeth and all, which again we'll do in the next chapter. Any procedure where flap is involved, surgical extraction, implant, periapical surgery, periosurgery, soft tissue biopsies, which are extensive, hard tissue biopsies, inferior alveolar nerve blocks for the patients who have hemophilia or a recent platelet count of less than 30 times 10 raised to the power 9 per liter. So remember the multiple of 3 is lower platelet count and hemophilia. In these two conditions, even inferior alveolar nerve block can lead to life-threatening bleeding risk. So it's a high-risk procedure. Memorize this. Another foundational point to learn. So your job in high-risk procedure is to assess the medical conditions and management. And you will also assess the congenital risk, congenital condition risk, refer to their hospital based. All your hemophilia and acquired conditions will require treatments in hospital setting if the procedure is likely to cause high risk of bleeding. Then patients who are taking combination of an anticoagulant and antiplatelet, that is 2x. No, that was 1.5x, right? That was 1.5x, anticoagulant and an antiplatelet. And then situations in which a practitioner is not comfortable, yourself also. So I think X formula will still apply. I'll teach you in the next class. Now, how will you assess the patient's history to evaluate the hemostasis before giving a dental procedure? So you will assess the patient's capacity to first. Thrombocytopenia has different categories, Priyanka. I'll come to it in few minutes in coming pages. You'll assess the patient's capacity to provide an accurate medical history, understand and consent to the procedure, which is minimal requirement of informed consent. So your basic approach when taking history in such condition is to get their medical conditions, get their drug history, even the herbal drugs that they're taking, because they also affect and impair hemostasis. Ask about their previous bleeding episodes and the management which was used to control it. Any family history of prolonged bleeding, ask about that. Right? What was the extent of recent excessive bleeding from their any recent cuts, nosebleeds, or menstrual cycles? How much bleeding has been occurring? Especially patients who have jaundice or purpura. It will give you an extent of how likely they are to bleed in a current situation. What is their current hemostasis situation? You will confirm the history with patient's medical practitioner. Ask them to interpret any recent blood test results and advise also whether there is any evidence of medical conditions listed amongst these tables. So ask about these. So now these are your congenital and acquired medical conditions which require assessment. Congenital one is clotting factor deficiency, hemophilia von Willebrand. There are certain connective tissue syndromes and disorders which leads to frail blood vessels which are more likely to rupture and again increased risk of bleeding. So Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Marfan syndrome, platelet function disorders. So certain platelet function disorder associated syndromes. Just remember these three are the predominant congenital situations. Acquired conditions are due to medical organ challenge, which is liver disease, cirrhosis, or evidence of liver disease on blood test. Maybe even hepatitis B history will come under that. Okay. And you have been marking in our UF files, UF2 files for hepatitis B medical referral. Remember, advice from the medical specialist. Anyone here remembers that? It's an acquired medical condition, and if his treatment is likely to have a high risk of bleeding, medical specialist, right? Kidney diseases which require dialysis, transplant, or the serum creatinine is higher. Lower platelet count like bone marrow failure, hematological malignancy, solid tumors which are in the bone marrow, total body irradiation which depletes platelets, chemotherapy which also depletes platelets, excessive chronic alcohol use, immune thrombocytopenia, hypersplenism, they all reduce the platelet count in the body. These are acquired conditions which increases the patient's risk of bleeding. These are patient related factors, as we said so, right? So these conditions would require further consultation with medical practitioners and dental specialists. This one, all your congenital ones. Exactly. Now we have to see whether that applies or we need more, Sudha, right? Now medications, so one is congenital condition, other was your acquired condition. The third is medication that impairs. Medication are antithrombotics and other medications. Antithrombotics are anticoagulants, direct acting anticoagulants. Your heparin, apixaban, dabigatran, rivaroxaban, warfarin. Antiplatelets, aspirin, clopidogrel, prasugrel, ticagrelor, right? So these are your antithrombotics. We'll talk about it in the next class. Other medications which also affect NSAIDs or your serotonin SNRIs or your SSRIs, even your BTKIs, which are used for lymphomas and leukemias treatment. They impair platelet function. Then supplements also can affect the hemostasis, which is ginkgo biloba, and garlic and curcumin. Right? So a lot of people take these herbal supplements without prescription also. So ask them if they're on daily high dose of curcumin, garlic, or ginkgo biloba. That will also increase their risk of bleeding. How will you manage bleeding risk in dental procedure? So basically, for more extensive procedures or which are expected to be of a longer duration, right? Consider limiting the extent of procedure and surgery in one sitting so that not excessive bleeding happens. Or refer to a consulting hospital-based team if a longer procedure is required and the risk is high. Yes, Dhara. These are commonly used in exam. So this table you need to know. Now, procedures which have higher risk of bleeding should be planned in early in the day and week to avoid the need to manage complications after hours with potentially fewer resources. So don't plan around weekend and plan around early in the week and early in the morning. Now, this is one basic flowchart which will help you approach the assessing and management of patients with increased bleeding risk. How will you assess that the bleeding risk is higher? Is the dental procedure likely to cause bleeding? Number one, as I always said, the checkbox starts with is the procedure is likely to cause bleeding. Because if the procedure is not likely to cause, the condition doesn't matter. But here, the grayness is that even if the procedure is unlikely to cause, congenital diseases still can bleed, even with your probing in periodontal probing in gingivitis. Agreed? That is one exception. Remember that was the first foundation point I gave you. Immediately you apply that here. Because even if you answer no, then treat using this table. Which table is that? They're talking about just the table that we covered and finished in the previous pages. So now, yes, the procedure is likely to cause prolonged bleeding. Now, the likely to cause are two likeliness. What? Low likeliness and high likeliness. Is that right? Low risk and high risk. In likely also, there give me yes or no's because right now I'm feeling everybody's zoned out. You are kinda right. I can sense it. I suddenly got the energy out of the chat box that there is something going on. But give yes and no's, yeah. See, it'll all come together. It's all new information, new way of processing. TG4 has simplified also a lot of things, but also made complicated. Thank you so much, Jay. And yes, be the sponges. So now when you say not likely, but because when I tell you a very important point, so give me yes or no because I want to make sure did it land or not. Because even if the procedure is not likely, remember the congenital periodontal probing in gingivitis. So go to that and follow that table. If you answer yes, that it is low likely, low risk or high risk, then when it is low risk or high risk, then you assess further about the medical conditions. What is the medical condition affecting? Signs of bleeding, bruising, jaundice, personal or family history. Yes. So combined effect. That means the procedure is also high risk, likely to cause, and medical conditions are also combining. Simply ask the medical practitioner what to do. What is the level of the risk? What is the treatment setting required? What is the after hour care, whether done in the specialist medical or dental team or hospital, whatever? Talk to the medical team. When the multifactorial situation happens that the procedure is also high risk and medical conditions are also present. Medical conditions are not present, but antithrombotic drugs are present. Well, the procedure is high risk, medical conditions are not present, but antithrombotic drugs are present. So now antithrombotic drugs are present. If no, then see any other drugs, the basic drugs that we talked about which were effective. If yes, see the advice for the patients taking other medications, which again will come in the next chapter when we talk about drugs. No, then standard approach. And if antithrombotic are yes, whether they are long run use or short term use. If short term use, defer the non urgent treatment till the procedure and therapy is completed. If it's long run use, you can't defer it. Then you will assess additional patient related factors which heighten the risk in combination with antithrombotics, like uncontrolled hypertension, suboptimal. Yes, now here boiled carb Sudha. This is where our boiled carb was. Older patients and other medications. Yes, if you answer that yes, and if he has additional factors, then again straight goes to the medical team will decide. So complex it becomes, go to the medical team. Simpler it becomes, simpler the condition, then manage according to the antithrombotic advices, which we will learn again in the next coming topic. Okay. Now, local hemostatic measures should be considered for all patients at increased bleeding risk. We have read that. Applying prolonged pressure to the wound is most important local measure. I'll do that once I complete this. Rosna, I'll go back and review it in the end of the class, okay? Because you will gather more information also. Then written information for post-procedural care. We have covered this in the bleeding chapter, management of post-surgical complications, post-procedural complications. Any patient who has bleeding, persistent oozing or bleeding, they should immediately seek medical attention. Management of post-procedural pain in such patients. Usually antithrombotics and NSAIDs are not combined. So paracetamol is the preferred analgesic for post-op pain in patients taking antithrombotic drugs. This is your exam concept. Paracetamol in patients who are taking antithrombotics after procedure. Also ask the patient to come for a follow-up phone call or a dental appointment within 2 days after the procedure to assess for bleeding, pain, delayed healing, infection, and then treat as necessary. Now, patients who have congenital or inherited bleeding disorder, this we'll do today. And thrombocytopenia, also I'll discuss with you. And acquired medical conditions. These three I'm doing with you now. After that, I'll review that flowchart again. Antithrombotic we'll do in the next class. Sorted? Clear? So let's do hemophilia management. Let's do thrombocytopenia management. And let's do your acquired management. And then let's review the chart. And that is it. Then specialists will follow up, not you just. Whoever is the treating dentist, they will follow up for post-procedural management. So for your congenital and inherited bleeding disorders, they are generally under the management of hematologist or hemophilic treatment center, right? So even the procedures here, certain procedures which are lower risk, periodontal probing in gingivitis, avoid it. Simple. In high risk of bleeding in these patients, now in these patients, remember inferior alveolar nerve block also became a high risk procedure, although it was your minimally invasive procedure for other patients. Remember that? Again, connect the loops. Start connecting the loops. How come I can remember? I'm also reading same with you, no? But do you remember? I'm giving you foundational points that inferior alveolar nerve block in itself is a minimally invasive procedure in a normal person, but in a congenital disease, it becomes a higher risk procedure. I know, very challenging class. I feel you all, okay? But take my word for it. You will get it. In the next class, it will become clear, and you revise this class, I promise you, you'll get it, okay? And you're getting it also, no? When I'm connecting the dots, it's just coming together or no? Tell me. When I'm helping you see and connect the dots, this is how you will work in exam. So inferior alveolar nerve block in itself is a one procedure, but becomes a high risk procedure in congenital patients, but in normal patients, a minimally invasive procedure. So any higher risk bleeding procedure in these congenital disease patients will require their management in the specialist setup only. Whether it's hospital or specialized clinics, they will handle. Regular general procedure can be done safely in general practice, which is non-invasive procedures, right? Which are non-invasive procedures or other minimally invasive procedures, but without only supragingival debridement and your periodontal probing. Those were the two, right? Which requires referral. Remember from those table snippets, periodontal probing in gingivitis and supragingival debridement. In congenital, assign it there. In inferior alveolar nerve block, assign it there. Rest all, general practice can do, but minimize gingival damage, right? Even in such patients, right? Agreed? Sorted? Deep breath? Making sense or not? Something at least coming to life, if not everything. I don't know, Justina, how I'm doing it. It's just coming to me and I'm feeling it is how you do it. But remember this. It's like having mental blocks of information and organizing them into files, color-coded files within your mental drawers. Kush. Can I tell you how many calories it takes when I explain a concept like that? And when you say, please repeat, just after I've given you heart and soul and all my strength into it. One last time. You watch the recording. I give you recordings to watch. Hemophilia congenital patients. Non-invasive, minimally invasive, you can do. But in non-invasive, periodontal probing with gingivitis, referral. In minimally invasive, supragingival debridement, referral. Rest all procedures, minimize your gingival trauma. Now, minimally invasive procedure, Priyanka, is also minimally invasive procedure is also inferior alveolar nerve block. They also become high risk in congenital refer. Sorted now? Kush, Jasmine, Priyanka. Now, no repeat, let's move forward. Inferior alveolar nerve block requires particular consideration because there is a risk of hematoma in the pharyngeal spaces. Consider whether alternative methods of local anesthesia would be adequate. So either you change the anesthesia method. If you can't, and this is the only block that is needed, then referral. Treat with the specialist setting. If an inferior alveolar nerve block is known to be required, refer to a hospital-based specialist team. Simple. I've simplified it for you with a lot of effort. Do not forget it in exam. Don't make my efforts go to waste, okay? Now, thrombocytopenia. Decisions on the management of patients with lower platelet counts, including the setting for the procedures, should be made in conjunction with medical and or specialist dental advice. Routine fillings with LA infiltration are considered safe in the patients for thrombocytopenia, right? But debridement is also considered safe, but platelet count becomes a factor here. So for the platelet counts, dental procedure of debridement, right? You should have more than 2 multiple. For regional nerve blocks, you should have more than 3 multiples. And for tooth extraction, simple, you have again like your regional nerve block, multiple of 3, your platelet counts. For tooth extraction, complex ones and molars and surgicals, it should be in the multiples of 5. This you have to remember. Debridement, nerve block, simple extraction, complex extraction. It also kind of like gives you a perspective. This is how the procedures are likely to cause bleeding. That is why in congenital, even debridement and probing become that risk, and regional becomes higher risk. Extractions, anyways, are higher risk there. Okay, so even in thrombocytopenia, debridement, this level, regional nerve block, higher level, higher platelets required. Tooth extraction, simple, same as regional nerve block. Tooth extraction complex, 5 multiple. Okay. For the acquired conditions, these include kidney problems, liver problem, bone marrow problems, multiple leukemias, malignancies, irradiation, etc., which affect the platelet count. They can synergistically increase the bleeding risk. Risk is difficult to quantify only through investigations, as you as a general dentist, but medical practitioner will decide. So all these acquired medical conditions, medical practitioner advice is needed if the procedure is likely to cause bleeding. And that was in the flowchart also. Remember, procedure is likely to cause bleeding. Medical conditions, yes, go to the medical practitioner. Simple. 1, 2, 3. This is the point that we are covering there. Procedure likely, yes. Medical condition, yes. Go to the practitioner, yes. Simple, yes. Now simple this one. 1, 2, 3. Half of the flowchart you already know. Rest we'll talk when I revise. If no medical condition but drug, then for drug, I think the best is tomorrow, Rosna, when we do further antithrombotic chapter, it will make more sense also. I should rather revise this flowchart with you when we do the antithrombotic. Medical condition we have done, so I've showed you in the flowchart, it immediately made sense. Did it or did it not? Tell me. As soon as I did the acquired conditions or medical conditions with you, it immediately made sense now. Antithrombotic, it will make sense right now. Even if I go through again, you can't ratify it, you can't mug it. Tomorrow, next class, when I do the antithrombotic drugs with you, then I show you and bring you back to this flowchart, and you'll be like, oh, that's eureka moment. Aha, that makes sense. So let's wait for our eureka moment. Okay, and then not just go and okay, read it and doesn't make sense. The molar would be a complex extraction, Paul, yes? Here, see? Because it's likely to convert into your surgical, right? Because of multiple routes. INB, inferior alveolar nerve block, is a minimally invasive procedure, Kush, but it becomes a highly likely to cause bleeding in congenital risk patients. Remember that table. Please, 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 Kush. Please use all your 5 senses and even the sixth one for ADC. To remember also, 6 senses, what you can see, hear, touch, taste, whatever, how you can touch, taste, TG, I don't know, but sixth sense of bringing back the information what you had read only few pages ago. So minimally invasive, iron block is a minimally invasive, Kush, see? Unlikely to cause, but for your congenital condition, it becomes a likely cause. Thursday will be the next class, yes, Jay. So for all the acquired medical conditions, if the risk is higher, increased bleeding risk, procedure is likely to cause prolonged bleeding, you have medical conditions, 1, 2, 3. I showed you the steps on the flowchart. Will you remember that? Consider consulting a hospital-based specialist team, formulating the management plan. Consider referring to the hospital-based specialist team for procedures with a higher bleeding risk. Right? See, if it is likely to cause prolonged bleeding for low and high risk, both Mehak, if it is yes, when you say answer to that flowchart in yes of procedure likely to cause bleeding, it includes both low risk and high risk. And medical condition are involved in low risk and high risk. You send yes, you send to the medical practitioner. Now, based on the low risk and the high risk, it will be decided whether medical practitioner might say, okay, send to this specialist medical team, or no, you do it. It's fine, or they'll tell, okay, no, get to the, but for higher risk, they will always recommend hospital. But in low risk, medical practitioner will tell you, Mehak, what to do. But anyways, if there is a prolonged risk, whether low or high, 1, 2, 3, yes, drop down to the medical practitioners. But for high risk, it's obvious that it would be under hospital setting. Clear? Now this part of flowchart is crystal clear, I hope. Yes? All right. All right, that was intense. And yeah, that would be it for today. Thank you so much, guys. Any more questions, you can ask me on WhatsApp. Second.